Hello and welcome to the first of my Falcon and the Winter Soldier reviews. I'm Corey Milne, and if you simply do not have the time to watch this whole video and you need to know right now, is the first episode good? Yes, it absolutely is. And if you stick around, I'll tell you why. So while WandaVision had a pretty jarring and intense debut, there's a certain sense of comfortability with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because while this is a brand new story for Bucky and Sam, this still is a continuation of the Steve Rogers and the Captain America story. While there are mentions to the larger MCU as a whole, it's things like the little character details and little musical cues that keep this show grounded as part of the MCU and reminds us of everything that's come before. Like in the first big action scene of the show, which we saw a lot of in the trailers, and by the way, it is way better than it looked in the trailers, like way better. But anyway, we'll come back to that in a second. When Falcon jumps out of the plane, it has that same kind of energy of when Steve Rogers jumped out of the plane in The Winter Soldier.
It's Sam. This has to be subtle.
Subtle. Got it.
That's why I don't ask.
Too shy or too scared?
Too busy.
And since we're talking about this first scene, let's really talk about it, because this is none of your generic superhero action pish you're getting in this show. This is some real gritty action. And I think a lot of that grit comes from executive producer Derek Kolstad. Derek Kolstad has worked on John Wick 1, John Wick 2 and John Wick 3 as a writer, and he's now serving as a writer and executive producer on Nobody, which comes out in cinemas this week. This guy knows action, alright? He gets it. His presence is felt all over the action in this first episode. Falcon apparently okay with killing people now. The body count racks up quick in that first scene. He's booting guys out of planes. He straight up brains this dude with his jetpack. I mean, come on. This is action unlike anything we've seen in the MCU, and we're only one scene in at this point. Between that scene and the Winter Soldier's frankly downright efficient killing spree later in the episode, we're given a wonderful taste of some of the action that we can expect in this show in the coming weeks. Back to this Falcon scene though, because there are a few things to take away from it. First off, we learn that Sam was doing contracts with the Air Force, which tells us right away that he did not end up taking up the mantle of Captain America, despite being given it by Steve Rogers 6 months prior. In this scene, we also get the return of Batroc the Leaper, who first appeared in Captain America the Winter Soldier. This time, he's leaping out of aeroplanes in an attempted kidnapping. I just want to take a wee second though to poke a hole in Batroc and his team's logic, because they have helicopters with guns, right? Lots of them. Almost too many helicopters with guns. And they're going up against a guy called the Falcon, a guy whose entire superhero alias is built around his jet-powered wingsuit, right? This guy was part of the team who took down Thanos and his army and saved the universe. This guy is a guy who drop-kicked a helicopter, and their plan was to skydive with some pistols and let the work experience kids operate the helicopters. Nice. Solid plan there. And Falcon gets to show off in a whole new light here as well. From the way he moves around in the air to the intensity of his action, he just gets some wholly unique offense that he normally doesn't get in the movies because he's relegated to flying guy with guns. That efficient killing spree that I was talking about earlier, that was a flashback Bucky was having to his Winter Soldier days. When he wakes up, he's on the floor of his apartment, which is a callback to the conversation Sam and Steve had at the start of the Winter Soldier.
Your bed is too soft. When I was over there, I sleep on the ground, use rock for pillows like a caveman. Now I'm home, lying in my bed, and it's like
Lying on a marshmallow. I feel like I'm gonna sink right to the floor.
So Bucky is in therapy as part of his pardon, which in one of my previous videos I had spoken about how they were going to address the whole Hydra sleeper agent turned saving the world thing. How's that viewed in the eyes of justice in the MCU? Well, it turns out he is pardoned, but he has to go to therapy, and he's got a sort of My Name is Earl style list of people from his Winter Soldier days that he needs to make amends with and make things right. And he's going about that with a smile. We also learn in the therapy that Bucky's struggling emotionally, socially, just generally struggling to kind of keep going. He spent the majority of his life, which that alone was longer than most people's overall lifespan, being a superpowered brainwashed killing machine, and now he's got to just go back to having freedom. And this is where we're going to get a lot of the human element of this show. This is the side of superheroes that the movies don't have time to show us. Bucky's alone, he doesn't have any friends left. His best friend in the whole world travelled back in time to wife up his crush and came back to give Sam the shield. He doesn't talk to anyone, he's ignoring Sam's texts. He doesn't really have anybody. He's certainly not going to find people with shared life experience, because remember what he said in Civil War of all the people that he's killed.
I remember all of it.
And on top of that, his therapist is kind of a hard ass, but I think that's a little bit of what he needs because she herself was a soldier, so she has shared life experience and can tell when he's lying and give it to him straight. And then we're introduced to Yori, who... Oh god, I don't want to do this. Yori is a delightful old man who Bucky seems to enjoy going out for lunch with, but... Oh god. Yori is on Bucky's list because in that flashback scene, Bucky shoots Yori's son in the face and he's gonna have to tell Yori this at some point. This is gonna be horrible to watch and I just don't want to do it. This is gonna be heartbreaking. One thing I certainly didn't expect so soon in the show was the Rhodey cameo, which before I get too into, I just want to highlight one little detail. There's a couple of glowing dots on his trousers from his leg braces. Since he's had those, we've only ever seen them wear them outside of his trousers, but because this was a formal occasion, he was wearing them under his trousers, and it was a nice detail of Marvel to put the little glowing dots on there, because they very easily could have just ignored that and not done it. And this isn't just a gratuitous MCU cameo, the conversation that he has with Sam adds a whole new layer of depth to Sam as a character. Sam gave back the shield because he doesn't feel worthy of carrying it. To him, Steve Rogers is Captain America and he doesn't feel like he can possibly live up to that. The movies don't have time to show you a lot of the human elements of these larger than life characters. Think of it this way, the movies are like highlight reels for the characters. You get to see their coolest fighting moves, you get to hear their funniest one-liners, the day gets saved and everyone goes home happy. But with the longer runtimes, we get to see things like Sam doubting himself or having to go to the bank to apply for a loan because his sister's struggling to stay afloat. These are things the movies don't show because they're not really sexy, but also when you've only got 2 and a bit hours, there's a lot of stuff you have to cut out. And I just this is one of the things, I'm starting to prefer the shows versus the movies because in one episode, I've felt more of a connection with both Sam and Bucky than I have in their entire movie appearances over all of the MCU. It's nice as an audience member to see guys like Sam and Bucky go through the same things that we all go through, feelings of self-doubt, not fitting in, or just more human moments to Sam getting called Uncle Sam by his family or Bucky getting called old-fashioned because he's 106 years old. It's things like that that draw us to the characters, not these hokey one-liners that they're forced to spew out in the movies. And they've now officially finally started touching on something that personally I've been wondering about since as far back as 2015 in Age of Ultron when Steve said,
I don't think I can afford a place in Brooklyn.
how do superheroes make money? In this episode we see Sam is reluctant to let his sister sell the family boat, but she's struggling financially and running out of options. And this is where we learn that in the MCU, all this superhero stuff that we've seen largely been done on good faith up to now. Sam, despite being an Avenger, despite saving the universe, and despite being fangirled all over by the bank teller, isn't eligible for a loan, partly because he's had no income for the last 5 years because he was snapped out of existence. And that's another thing that this show is focusing on, life after the snap. The world changed a lot in those 5 years, most of which we've yet to see how, and people are just struggling to find a new sense of normality after coming back. But I do kind of like the idea that when Tony Stark died, he had it written in his will that anyone who was against him in Civil War gets cut off financially. The villains of the show weren't really touched on much in this episode, but we do get one scene with the Flag Smashers where Torres, who's one of Sam's Air Force teammates and newcomer to the MCU, goes undercover at one of their attacks and gets his head kicked in. He reports this back to Sam, and while he's doing this, Sam's sister comes into the room and switches on the TV, and we learn that the American government is announcing a new Captain America. First of all, how dare they besmirch the Captain America name with this wee fanny in the suit? But secondly, we all felt this scene. We were all there with Sam when that was announced. Sam has the shield for 6 months and he can't bring himself to take up the mantle of Captain America because of overwhelming self-doubt. He gives it back to the American government for a couple of days and they put this dweeb in it? That's not right. That's kind of all we really get in this episode in terms of villains, unless you want to count the arsehole bank teller, which I don't blame you. Just remember that this is the first episode, so they've got to set up the story, they've got to set up the heroes, then they can start introducing the villains and breaking down the heroes. But that's about all I've got for the episode so far. What did you think of it? Personally, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It lived up to the expectations and it set a great groundwork for the rest of the show. We've got a taste of some of the best MCU action we've ever seen, and we've got some amazing little character moments that just make these guys feel much more human and much more relatable. And I'm really excited to see how that develops, and come the last episode, just how much we're all rooting for them. So thank you very much for watching, I really do appreciate it. This is just a daft wee project for me so far, and I'm getting more and more invested by the week. So make sure you subscribe to get the new reviews and anything else that I post when it comes out. Thanks for watching, I'm Corey Millen, and I'll see you next week.